Have you ever looked at someone who committed terrible acts and thought, I could never do that? The neighbor who tortured prisoners of war, the law-abiding citizen who joined a murderous mob, the respected professional who participated in genocide. These aren't rare anomalies or born monsters. They're ordinary people who underwent a transformation that psychology has mapped out with terrifying precision. And the most disturbing part? This same transformation could happen to you. By the end of this video, you'll understand the exact psychological mechanisms that corrupt good people, how easily your own moral compass can be manipulated, and, most importantly, how to recognize and resist these forces. The final revelation might completely change how you see human nature forever. Look around you. Every seemingly normal person walking down the street is capable of unspeakable acts under the right conditions. History has proven this again and again. Nazi Germany didn't recruit monsters. It turned ordinary citizens into willing executioners. Abu Ghraib wasn't staffed by sadists. It transformed average soldiers. Corporate frauds don't begin with criminals. They corrupt ethical professionals step by step. This isn't coincidental. It's systematic, predictable, and it could happen to anyone, even you. We tell ourselves comforting lies about human nature. We believe good people stay good. We assume our moral character is fixed and immutable. We're certain we would never participate in atrocities. These are delusions. The evidence from psychology, history, and neuroscience tells a far darker story. One that forces us to question everything we believe about ourselves. What psychologist Philip Zimbardo called the Lucifer effect reveals perhaps the most disturbing reality about human existence. The line between heroism and atrocity isn't drawn between different types of people. It runs through every human heart. Your moral character isn't a fixed trait, it's a situational response. And this truth changes everything about how we understand evil. Think this couldn't be you? Let me take you back to 1971, when Zimbardo conducted his infamous Stanford Prison Experiment. 24 ordinary college students were randomly divided into prisoners and guards in a simulated prison environment. What happened next was so shocking that the 2-week experiment had to be shut down after just 6 days. These normal, psychologically healthy students transformed completely. Guards became increasingly sadistic, forcing prisoners to clean toilets with their bare hands, creating humiliating punishments, and psychologically torturing their fellow students. Prisoners became passive, depressed, and broken. These weren't evil people. They were average college students who adapted to their roles in ways that horrified even the researchers. Their behavior wasn't determined by their character, but by the situation they found themselves in. The most terrifying part? When interviewed afterward, many participants couldn't explain their own behavior. They didn't recognize themselves. The situation had completely overridden their normal moral boundaries. But this isn't an isolated case. In the 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram wanted to understand how ordinary Germans could participate in Nazi atrocities. He designed an experiment where participants were instructed to administer what they believed were increasingly painful electric shocks to another person whenever they answered questions incorrectly. Despite hearing screams of pain from the other room, despite believing they might be causing permanent harm, 65% of participants continued administering shocks up to the maximum 450 volts, simply because a man in a lab coat told them the experiment must continue. The most chilling aspect isn't that some people obeyed, it's that most people did. And these weren't sadists or psychopaths. They were teachers, office workers, and everyday citizens. People just like you. So, what makes good people do terrible things? What psychological mechanisms transform normal, moral humans into monsters? There are several forces at work, and each one is more insidious than the last. The first is the gradual erosion of moral boundaries. It never happens overnight. It begins with small compromises, minor betrayals of your principles that seem harmless in isolation. A guard at Abu Ghraib doesn't start by torturing prisoners. He begins by watching others do it. Then he helps set up the equipment. Then he follows an order to intimidate a prisoner. Each small step makes the next one easier, until actions that once seemed unthinkable become routine. This is known as the slippery slope effect. Once the first boundary is crossed, the next one becomes easier to step over. Your brain adapts to each new level of compromise, constantly redefining what feels acceptable. Think about times in your own life when you've made small ethical compromises. Maybe you lied to protect someone. Maybe you bent rules for what seemed like a good cause. Maybe you looked the other way when you saw something wrong. These might seem harmless in isolation, but they establish patterns that can lead to greater moral failures. Each compromise reshapes your identity slightly, making previously unthinkable actions seem more reasonable. The second force is obedience to authority. Milgram's experiments reveal how powerful this influence can be. When someone in a position of power gives an order, our natural tendency is compliance, even when the order violates our personal morality. Society trains us from childhood to respect authority: parents, teachers, bosses, governments. This conditioning runs so deep that when faced with an authoritative command, most people's first instinct is compliance, not resistance. Look at some of history's worst atrocities: the Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide, the Cambodian killing fields. None of these were carried out solely by sadistic monsters. They were implemented by ordinary people following orders, people who had been convinced that authority figures knew best. Even in the corporate world, we see this pattern. Employees at companies like Enron or Wells Fargo didn't start out wanting to defraud customers. They followed increasingly unethical directives from above, each time telling themselves, "I'm just doing my job." The third psychological force is dehumanization, the process of viewing others as less than human. Throughout history, perpetrators of violence didn't see their victims as people. They saw them as abstractions, obstacles, or threats. Nazi propaganda described Jews as vermin. Rwandan radio called Tutsis cockroaches. American soldiers at Abu Ghraib were trained to see prisoners as enemy combatants, not as human beings with rights and dignity. This mechanism isn't limited to extreme cases. It appears in everyday life. Political opponents become libtards or fascists. Immigrants become illegals. The homeless become vagrants. Each label diminishes our capacity for empathy, making it easier to justify indifference or cruelty. When we strip away someone's humanity, we simultaneously strip away our moral obligations toward them. Once someone is seen as less than human, hurting them no longer feels wrong. The fourth force is diffusion of responsibility. In groups, individuals feel less personally accountable for their actions. Everyone was doing it becomes a powerful justification for behavior we would never engage in alone. This is why mob violence can be so brutal. In a crowd, personal responsibility is diluted. No single person feels fully responsible for the outcome, even when they are actively participating. We saw this clearly in Zimbardo's prison experiment. Guards who behaved cruelly later explained that they were just playing their role, or that the other guards were doing worse things. This diffusion of responsibility allowed them to commit acts they would never have considered as individuals. The same phenomenon appears in corporate scandals, where employees rationalize unethical behavior because that's just how things are done here, or I was just following the standard procedure. But there's a fifth force that might be the most powerful of all: self-justification. People rarely see themselves as villains, even when committing terrible acts. Instead, they create narratives that allow them to maintain their self-image as good people. Nazi officers claimed they were following orders or protecting Germany. American soldiers at Abu Ghraib believed they were gathering intelligence to save lives. Corporate fraudsters convinced themselves they're just playing by the rules of the game. This self-justification is powered by cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort we experience when our actions contradict our beliefs. When faced with this contradiction, we rarely change our actions. Instead, we change our beliefs to justify those actions. Each justification makes the next transgression easier, creating a dangerous spiral where increasingly harmful behavior feels increasingly justified. These 5 forces, moral erosion, obedience to authority, dehumanization, diffusion of responsibility, and self-justification, can transform even the most moral person into someone capable of terrible acts. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. These aren't just historical patterns. They're active in your daily life right now. They operate in workplaces, schools, social media, and families. And most people never recognize them until it's too late. So ask yourself, have you ever followed orders that made you uncomfortable? Have you ever dehumanized someone who differed from you politically, religiously, or ethnically? Have you ever justified actions you'd condemn in others? If you're honest, the answer is probably yes. We all have. Which leads to a profound question. Is anyone truly immune to the Lucifer effect, or is it a danger we all face? The uncomfortable truth is that none of us are entirely immune. While certain personality traits, strong empathy, self-awareness, moral courage, may offer some protection, psychology shows that under the right circumstances, almost anyone can commit acts they would normally consider unthinkable. This isn't a comfortable truth, but acknowledging it is essential. We all carry within us the capacity for both remarkable good and unspeakable harm. Carl Jung described this as the shadow, the darker aspects of our psyche that we often repress or deny. Have you ever felt a surge of rage so intense it surprised you? Have you ever secretly wished harm on someone who hurt you? These glimpses of your shadow reveal what you're capable of under the right circumstances. The shadow isn't something to fear or eliminate. It's something to acknowledge and integrate. Understanding your capacity for darkness is the first step in preventing it from controlling you. Those who deny their shadow are often the most vulnerable to corruption because they lack awareness of their own psychological triggers and weaknesses. Jung argued that true psychological health comes not from denying our shadow, but from bringing it into conscious awareness. Only by acknowledging what we're capable of can we make choices that align with our higher values. The question isn't whether you have a shadow. Everyone does. The question is whether you control it or it controls you. But if we're all vulnerable to corruption, how can we protect ourselves? How can we resist the psychological forces that lead good people astray? The answer isn't simple, but there are specific strategies that can help us maintain our moral compass, even in difficult situations. Let's explore these strategies, beginning with perhaps the most essential: moral courage. Moral courage is the willingness to take action in accordance with ethical beliefs, despite risk, opposition, or fear. It's what allows a whistleblower to expose corruption, a bystander to intervene when someone is being harmed, or anyone to speak truth when lies would be safer. History offers countless examples: Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat, Oskar Schindler risking his life to save Jews during the Holocaust, or the tank man of Tiananmen Square standing against tanks. These weren't people with superhuman abilities. They were ordinary individuals who chose action over passivity when it mattered most. But moral courage isn't something we're born with. It's something we develop through practice. Like a muscle, it strengthens with use and atrophies with neglect. How do you build this capacity? Start by identifying your core values, the principles that matter most to you. Then practice small acts of courage daily. Speak up when you hear a derogatory joke. Question policies that seem unfair. Admit mistakes even when it would be easier to hide them. These courage workouts build your capacity for more significant moral action when the moment comes. Remember, heroes aren't people who feel no fear. They're people who act despite their fear. The second strategy is situational awareness, the ability to recognize when you're being influenced by the forces we've discussed. Learn to spot the warning signs, incremental ethical violations, euphemistic language, diffusion of responsibility, and dehumanization of others. When you notice these patterns, pause and ask yourself critical questions. Am I making excuses for behavior I know is wrong? Would I judge someone else harshly for doing what I'm about to do? Am I being honest with myself about my motives? The third strategy is to build communities of moral support. Studies of rescuers during genocides consistently show that people rarely act heroically in isolation. They are usually part of moral communities that reinforce ethical behavior. Surround yourself with people who share your values and will support your moral choices. When you stand alone, moral courage is difficult. When you stand with others, it becomes sustainable. The fourth strategy is to practice empathy intentionally. Empathy directly counteracts dehumanization by reminding us of our common humanity. When we truly see others as individuals with hopes, fears, and dreams, people who love and suffer just as we do, it becomes much harder to harm them or stand by while others do. Cultivating empathy isn't just a nice ideal. It's a practical safeguard against moral corruption. Studies show that people with higher empathy are less likely to obey unethical orders or participate in group cruelty. But perhaps the most powerful insight of all comes from the Soviet dissident Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote, "The line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being." This profound truth is both humbling and empowering. Humbling because it reminds us that no one, including ourselves, is immune to corruption. Empowering because it places the capacity for choice squarely in our hands. We cannot control all the circumstances we face, but we can develop the awareness and skills to navigate them with greater integrity. The battle between good and evil doesn't rage primarily between different groups or nations. It unfolds within each human heart, including yours. Every day presents new choices, new pressures, new opportunities to either strengthen or compromise your character. The question isn't whether you'll face these challenges, but how you'll respond when you do. So, what separates those who maintain their humanity under pressure from those who lose it? Not intelligence, not social background, not even personality, but practice. Those who regularly exercise their moral muscles develop the strength to withstand pressures that would break others. Those who habitually rationalize small violations make themselves vulnerable to larger ones later. The forces that can transform good people into perpetrators of evil are powerful, but not invincible. The choice between good and evil is rarely made in a single dramatic moment. It's made in countless small decisions that either strengthen or erode our moral foundation. Let's focus on what you can do starting today to become not just resilient, but a source of light in challenging circumstances. First, recognize your sphere of influence. No matter how limited your formal authority may seem, you affect the moral environment around you. Every choice you make either strengthens or weakens the ethical climate in your relationships, workplace, and community. Consider Oskar Schindler, whose story illustrates how influence can be leveraged for extraordinary good. Initially motivated by profit, Schindler ultimately used his position as a factory owner to save over 1,000 Jewish lives during the Holocaust. He didn't start as a hero. He became one through successive choices that aligned with human dignity rather than the prevailing ideology of his time. His example reminds us that heroism often begins not with grand gestures, but with small refusals to participate in dehumanization. Each time Schindler recognized a Jewish worker as a person rather than a statistic, he strengthened his capacity for the larger moral actions that would eventually define his legacy. His story isn't just inspirational, it's instructional. Second, continuously educate yourself. Knowledge is one of the most effective defenses against manipulation and moral erosion. Study history to understand how ordinary people were led to commit extraordinary atrocities, and how others resisted. Explore psychology to recognize the mechanisms that can bypass your moral reasoning. This education isn't academic, it's practical. It provides the cognitive tools to recognize manipulation before it succeeds, and the ethical vocabulary to articulate your values when they're challenged. Third, practice moral courage in everyday situations. Standing up to a bully, speaking truth to power in a meeting, or simply refusing to laugh at a dehumanizing joke. These seemingly small actions build the moral muscles needed for larger challenges. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the determination that something else matters more than fear. Each time you choose integrity over convenience, you strengthen your capacity for moral action. Fourth, maintain vigilance against rationalization. We rarely describe our own compromises accurately. Instead, we create narratives that preserve our self-image while justifying behavior that contradicts our stated values. Combat this tendency through regular self-examination. The question isn't whether you rationalize, everyone does, but whether you're willing to challenge those rationalizations when they arise. Fifth, develop resilience through psychological and spiritual practices. Moral courage requires not just ethical clarity, but emotional stamina. Practices like mindfulness meditation, journaling, time in nature, or religious devotion can strengthen your capacity to face difficulty without becoming overwhelmed by it. Resilience is what allows you to maintain integrity not just in a single challenging moment, but across a lifetime of such moments. But what happens when we fail? Because inevitably, we will. There will be moments when you compromise your values, remain silent when you should speak, or participate in systems you know are harmful. How you respond to these failures matters tremendously. Do you use them as reasons to give up, or do you treat them as opportunities to learn and grow? The ability to forgive yourself without excusing harmful behavior is essential for breaking free from cycles of moral decline. Guilt can be a powerful motivator for change, but shame often leads to defensiveness and further rationalization. Learn to acknowledge failures honestly while maintaining belief in your capacity for growth. Finally, return to the profound insight that the line between good and evil runs through every human heart. This understanding fosters both humility and determination. Humility because you recognize your own vulnerability to corruption. Determination because you understand the importance of developing moral strength. Imagine a world where each of us takes responsibility for our choices, where we resist forces that dehumanize and divide, where we create environments that nurture compassion and integrity. This isn't an unattainable ideal. It's a reality we can build one decision at a time, starting with our next choice. As we conclude this journey, reflect on what you've learned today and ask yourself, how will you apply these insights in your own life? How will you recognize and resist the forces that can lead even good people toward darkness? What practices will you adopt to strengthen your moral courage? The question isn't whether you'll face situations that test your character. It's whether you'll be prepared when they arrive. The choice between good and evil isn't made once. It's made daily, in moments large and small. Will you rise to the challenge? The answer will shape not just your life, but the world we share. Because in the end, the most powerful protection against evil isn't laws or institutions. It's individuals who refuse to be corrupted, who stand firm in their values even when it would be easier to give in. As Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist Viktor Frankl observed, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom and power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. That space, that moment of choice between stimulus and response, is where our humanity lives. It's where we decide, again and again, who we will become. And it's available to all of us, in every moment, no matter what forces are arrayed against us. The Lucifer effect is real. The transformation from good to evil is a documented psychological pattern that is repeated throughout history, but it's not inevitable. With awareness, courage, and practice, we can choose a different path. If this message resonated with you, if you crave deeper insights into psychology, morality, and human nature, then subscribe to the channel, challenge yourself, rise above, become more. Like this video, share it with those who need to hear these truths, and comment below. Are some people naturally immune to corruption, or is moral strength something we must actively develop? Let's discuss.